Hello, everybody. Welcome to the final session of Equity in HR. This session is the impact of inclusion, where we're really going to dive into the role that inclusive practices play in fostering a diverse and thriving workforce. I have a lovely panel of professionals here. I'm so excited to dive into this with everybody. I'll start with myself. My name is Eliane. I am a talent acquisition specialist for Diverse Talent, and I am also the program coordinator for REACH, which is Diverse Talent sister nonprofit. Here again, we're just diving into impact of inclusion, and I will pass the floor to Carrie.
Excellent, thank you. Hi, I'm Carrie Hicks, and I am the leader of HR at a company called Capella Space, which is in the space technology satellite industry. I've been in HR leadership and HR consulting for about the last 30 years, and I am delighted to be here to talk about inclusivity, which is a subject near and dear to my heart, and something I'm very passionate about.
Great. Randy, I'll pass it to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Randy Reyes. I use he, they pronouns. I'm an actor, director, and theater educator here in the Twin Cities. I work as an actor and facilitator for the Pillsbury House and Theaters program called Breaking Ice, which is diversity, inclusion, and equity training that has a performance and also a facilitation. And I'm very happy to be here with this panel.
Yes, thank you, Randy. And last but not least, Tasha.
Yes, hi everyone, great to be here. And yes, Tasha Jones, CEO and founder of LV Jones Consulting, where I bring over 20 years of experience in marketing and partnering with organizations who profess these commitments to diversity, equity, inclusion, to inclusion and belonging. And what I do is I help them find the messaging and the story and the way that they're putting those commitments into action.
Fabulous. Well, thank you again all so much for being here. I'm so excited. So I'm just going to dive right in and then we'll take audience questions as they come in as well. So first question I have for you is, what benchmarkers do you use to ensure that you and your organization are instituting inclusive practices? And how do you ensure that your goals and expectations are being met? Tasha, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Sure. I'm a big believer. Something I always try to have my clients do is, how are you tracking your diversity in terms of the spectrum of diversity that you're trying to make sure you represent? And I don't mean checkbox, I mean authentically across lived experience, new or diverse. Like, how are you making sure that you're having representation across all levels of your organization? And if not, what are you doing in partnering with organizations such as Diverse Talent to make sure that you're getting that diverse composition? And then I'm a big believer in surveys. Your employees will tell you. They will tell you if they feel like they have this sense of inclusion and belonging, and open it up for recommendations. But when you do those surveys, be ready to follow through, have an action plan about how you're going to implement some of those feasible ideas. And then I always say, like, make sure your marketing team is at the table and how you're threading that and communicating that internally and externally.
Absolutely. Surveys too, the action that comes with that, it's like, oh, take this survey. What are you really going to do with it? So the follow through there, I think that's a great point. Really important. Randy.
Yeah, I feel that you use the word practice, and I think that's an important place to get to. So it's not a checkbox thing, which I feel like it needs to be in the beginning, just so we're paying attention to it. But hopefully it becomes a practice. So for the rehearsals that we have with Breaking Ice, we do a check-in before every rehearsal. So we all can say how we're doing, how we're feeling today. Sometimes they're quick. Maybe it's just a 1 to 10, how you feeling. So there's no surprises. We feel seen, we feel heard, and it is a practice that we do every day. And then there's no surprises. We know what's happening. If there's something off, we talk about it right there. And it's not necessarily even about the company and what we're doing, but just our lives and how we are functioning and how we're doing that day.
Yeah, general check-ins are super important. Just, yeah, feeling the room. I mean, when you're in the same space on a regular occasion, it's important to be checking in for sure. And Carrie,
Yeah, I agree that diversity data helps identify areas for improvement. And I think it's important to go back beyond basic demographics, look at things like disability status, veteran status, and really try to understand the full spectrum of your workforce. I think you can look at recruitment and promotion metrics as well through the hiring and promotion process and try to identify potential bias that way. I totally agree about surveys. They are one of the best tools that we have to understand how people are feeling. I also think you can monitor participation in ERGs, make sure that employee satisfaction surveys are reflecting that they are being utilized and that people are feeling like they are accomplishing what they need to accomplish. And, you know, I like to try to forget kind of the boring spreadsheets and think about diversity dashboards and try to track things that way. I also think it's really important to add inclusion quotients to the performance reviews of leaders and make sure that that their buy-in is reflected there.
absolutely. Good insights there. Thank you all. Next question. What are the key components in creating an inclusive work culture, and what initiatives have you as a leader taken in your industry or in your daily work life to contribute to and increase inclusive work culture in your daily lives? Randy, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I feel especially with marginalized communities, the idea of feeling like you are seen, heard, and that you belong, and having a voice or feeling like that your voice is valued. So there's something in our industry that's been here for a little while, but it's being developed more and more now, which is an intimacy director or an intimacy coordinator. And it works similarly like a fight choreographer, but with intimacy. But it's also gone beyond just like, oh, this scene has the kiss. How do we make sure that that's handled well, that everybody has their boundaries being met, and that there's a process to that, and not just, okay, just go at it. So that's usually what an intimacy director or coordinator does. But I've been using intimacy coordinators and directors to create a culture of figuring out where our boundaries are from the beginning. So again, there is a practice that is much more about consent. It's a consent practice rather than just using it for specific intimate moments in a play. And with that, establishing that we care about your boundaries, that we have tools if you're not feeling well, mental health and all of those things, people feel like they can relax and that they're being seen and felt valued and heard. And there is a structure around in which they can function at their best.
Absolutely. I think you can even pick that up in the breaking ice performance on, again, being in the daily routine at the same job all the time. You can kind of, I don't know, things can fly by you that maybe you didn't realize were offensive, or something's a boundary. So it's super, the breaking ice performance is a great way to tap in and see kind of those nuanced or taboos in everyday life. But that's a very interesting, I've never thought about a role like that, but that role is so important, that intimacy coordinator for sure.
Yeah.
Carrie.
Yeah, I agree about the intimacy coordinator, Randy. It's so much fun to have a little window into your creative world. And so looking forward to hearing more. Some of the ways that I think you can create an inclusive work culture are through things like unconscious bias training. You know, I think that we have to watch out for its impact on decision making, especially in recruitment and performance reviews. Again, ERGs, they're just such a wonderful arrow to have in your quiver. Mentorship programs and reverse mentorship are also programs that I think can work really well. I'm kind of excited about implementing some reverse mentorship with our intern program this summer here at Capella. I think we have to think about psychological safety when we think about culture and creating psychologically safe places. So places where vulnerability and openness are encouraged that expression is encouraged. And I think, some of the celebrations of differences can make a huge impact as well. And this is something that really was driven home to me through some of my training through REACH. And those sort of opportunities to think about potlucks and heritage talks and really kind of that human element that can really have a big impact on culture. And some of the initiatives that I've taken really are around sort of psychologically safe spaces, celebrations of differences, and kind of putting into action some of those ideas and creative channels that come through some of our ERGs.
Absolutely. Going back to the initiatives as well, an initiative can be simply going to grab lunch with somebody and just learning a little bit more about them. It's again, very REACH centered on the connecting on a human level. You could sit next to somebody for 30 years and not know very basic information about them in a traditional workspace. So, finding that human connection and the importance that human connection has in fostering that culture it's a great thing to point out. So thank you. Tasha, I'll pass it to you.
Sure, I love it. And I have to tell you, Randy, I echo Carrie. I think I'm going to have to repurpose your intimacy coordinator because I've been calling them onboarding buddies, but what you have created sounds so much more fun and personable. And so thank you for that gift. We will credit you. But at the end of the day, this is what this is, to your point, Elliot. It's human-centered work. And I don't know if I can share my screen, but I have this graphic that my clients find really helpful. And let's see, it's not that, but it's this. And let me just enlarge it a bit so you can see it. Well, not that much. Hold, please. But the point is, it's basically the concept of thinking about how you're threading this inclusive, environment, this equitable, diverse, inclusive environment or workplace culture is think of it like a dance. And so here this shows you like how this can play out and the way of a dance. And so the equality is, because people often get equality and equity mixed up, but the equality is, which sorry, if this, I thought I was zooming in so you can see it better, but the equality piece is, making sure everyone gets the invitation to the party. And the diversity is that everyone, is, and there's diversity among everyone who's invited. So to Carrie's point, we're celebrating representation of difference. And then that takes us down to equity in terms of making sure everyone has a way to get to the party. How's everyone having access to get to the party that they've been invited to? And then inclusion is who's all being part of planning this party, who's being asked to dance during the party. And then the belonging part is like, did everyone feel comfortable to suggest the decor, to honor their voice and how their culture might be represented, to Carrie's point. And then, to making sure that they never felt that that they felt uninhibited to ask for their favorite song. And that they could simply enjoy all elements of the experience. And so I love sharing this visual because for me, sometimes people get confused by, well, first, hold up, I'm caught up in definition. I don't understand how to make my workplace feel equitable. What's that mean? Is this finance? And so I feel like when you kind of break down that path, it's really helpful. So just reiterating, it's human-centered work, making sure everyone has the ability to be part of the party in the most authentic and enriching ways.
Yeah, I love that visual. Please share that. That
I
would
will,
be amazing. Yes. I love that visual though, and it really speaks to, it's not, department specific. It's every department or everybody can individually use a graphic like that just for general inclusivity, a very basic kind of mind map, but it also displays the positive feedback loop of when you do all these things, the circles, and those that are within these circles can tell others. And it, again, that feedback for that culture that retains and continues to make where you work or the culture that you work to establish.
And you see how it makes that belonging, like it
Yes.
leads toward this feeling of belonging. And I just have to say, I did not create that graphic. Like that is owned by someone else, but it's been such a valuable visual for my clients.
Oh, I love it. That's
I'll
such a
send
great
it to you.
analogy. It's so strong, and it really captures sort of that human connection element that I think people miss when they think about this topic.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that though. That was a great visual. Thanks. All right. Next question I have for you all is, in your experience, how have you collaborated with other departments such as marketing or product development to ensure that inclusivity is considered in all aspects of a business or organization? Carrie, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Yeah, that's such a great question. It has to start at the top. So leadership commitment is number one. And there need to be clear expectations, clear communication, their commitment to inclusion, and its importance in the company's success needs to be clear. And, so that can be done a few different ways through company-wide statements, training, holding people accountable, as I referred to earlier, in terms of inclusion metrics, and just making sure that those inclusive environments are being fostered. And I think too, we have to think about recruitment when we think about other departments. So are we, making sure that those recruitment practices are everything they need to be in terms of looking for diverse candidates, diversifying the interview panels, using inclusive job descriptions. Tasha, I'm sure, could have some wonderful input in terms of, using the right language and making sure that you're really hitting the mark in terms of that. And really just trying to tap into pools that cater to unrepresented groups. So the work like that diverse talent does, for instance, is really important, and such a strong foundation for this kind of recruitment activity.
Yeah, I think that also really speaks to Tasha's point of like having everybody invited, especially with recruiting panels. I mean, my daily life is going to be different from everybody else's. So ensuring those experiences or maybe key questions are addressed and answered right off the bat for sure, and having all those people present. Randy.
Yeah, so I'll talk through the industry, my industry, but so a lot of organizations, a lot of theaters now want to diversify their programming, want to have different representation on stage. So let's say they do like a Midsummer Night's Dream, and they cast it with a lot of different ethnic actors, ethnicities on stage. Yes. And yet the production can be very classical and not actually celebrate the diversity that is on stage, right? So we are different, Black, Asian, Latinx, but we're all still dressed in Shakespearean clothes for whatever reason. So even though it is a diverse looking cast, so that's a check mark, we're not really feeling like we are truly represented in the piece. So this actually happened to me at a Guthrie production, which is a regional theater here in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. And I was cast in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I played Francis Flute. And there's a section where he's changing into these different outfits within the play, in the play. And it had been done before, and it was just generic, like clothes of like what the mom would wear, what his sister would wear. And I talked to the director and I said, can I talk to the costume person, and can it be representative of someone that might look like me? So let's say that my character is Japanese. So when I represent my mom, I might be in a kimono. And then when I represent my sister, I'll come out in a little schoolgirl outfits with pigtails and a lollipop, and play onto those tropes, but acknowledging that I look the way that I do. And the director said, sure. And I talked to the costume designer. The costume designer's like, that sounds great. It's very specific. And the reaction that it got from the audience was unbelievable, because it makes more sense. And I felt heard and seen, and it worked better for the play in general.
I love that example. That is super, super cool. And I mean, shows you also kind of having to take the reins in that, I think, that's a difficult thing to just take the initiative on that. It's not necessarily the most comfortable, but it also goes beyond kind of what you brought up earlier about it may be fine to start with the checkbox, but it's about how you go beyond that. Like, sure, we can start with that. How are we developing this into a practice? How can, the future actors that play in that role take what you've taught them and integrate it into their own experiences? That's really cool. And I'm not shocked at all that it was a hit, and I'm sure that made a lot of audience members feel connected with it much more than they probably would have if it was just played as it was.
I do have to say that there is a power dynamic in me speaking up. And luckily, I trusted and I knew the director well enough. And it was high stakes. It was at the Guthrie, but I knew the director, who was the artistic director. And I've worked with him enough times where I felt like I had that relationship and that I could bring my voice into, but that's not always the case. And sometimes those power dynamics don't allow that kind of conversation to happen.
Absolutely. And I think that touches on what Carrie was saying earlier about it's got to start from the top down. At the end of the day, you need leaders who are taking equity and inclusivity seriously so that it does have that trickle down effect, so that those who maybe aren't quite in the highest leadership roles feel comfortable coming forward and saying, hey, I really think this is a good idea. And again, it shows how that impact, it hits greater. But again, yeah, you got to have those people in those roles that you trust as well. Super important. Tasha, I'll pass it to you.
Sure. I'm so inspired by Randy's example of what I often in the corporate world would call managing up and having that trusted space to do so. Randy and Carrie, I hope this resonates with you, but I'm reminded of this story from Sean Akor, author of Big Potential. And he references this story about a composer for the Philharmonic who had this cellist who was an 11th chair cellist. And she didn't, mind you, Boston Philharmonic is nothing to snub. It's very esteemed, correct? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And so she's 11th chair, but she's feeling like, well, my ideas are only, I don't need to contribute my ideas because I'm not first chair. So I'm just going to play like I'm 11th chair. And so there was this one moment where the composer was receptive to input, and he kind of got this sense from her. This is his TED Talk, by the way. Got the sense from her that, hey, tell me your idea. We've got this concerto that we're going to play next performance, and I want to hear feedback. So she gave this feedback, and he incorporated it in the next performance, and it was met with rave reviews. And what happened was this 11th chair started standing tall, like she was, performing like she was first chair, seeing herself as first chair. And so I just, regardless of if you're 11th chair, always contribute your first chair ideas. But I think what Randy helped me really want to hone in on was for the leaders that have, to Carrie's point, the power and the position to receive those ideas, look at what that does in terms of uplifting morale for your 11th chair, 10th chair, so on and so forth. But then look how everyone received that. Like what Randy, it was met with rave reviews, as was that Boston Philharmonic performance. And so I think when we are inclusive of other ideas that are different, we could be surprised by when we test them out to incorporate them and test them out more. So how are you driving that action forward as you're incorporating those ideas? That creates belonging. I feel invited to the party to help contribute this first chair idea. And I think that's what it's about. And I would also add, having your voices that represent what you're trying to convey. So I'm not just saying having your people of color voices or only having your neurodivergent voices, but depending on what you're trying to achieve, make sure those voices are at the table to ensure that it's authentic, because it's their firsthand lived experience that's going to add value versus somebody's secondary experience. Like, oh, my uncle went through that. Let me tell you what, I think I have some insight.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, Randy, loved that story. And Tasha, great side story with that. I think it's super important. And again, having that trust in your leaders to take what I'm saying seriously and do something with it. Again, having that translate to action and you as a leader, as anybody in this world, you may not be able to make everything happen, but it's about, you got to have the track record of, listen, this person came to me and said this, I'm going to do what I can. Not an easy lift, but the most important lift to making everybody feel good and like they have a sense of belonging. So thank you all. That was fabulous. All right, moving on. How have you seen the reversal of affirmative action affect the workplace, whether that's your workplace or others? Carrie, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I love this question. I just got to Capella, so I'm not sure how it's affected here yet, but it's so interesting. From what I've read, the data suggests that there has been a decline. So a decrease in workplace diversity, particularly for women and minorities, in areas where it's been banned. So I think, some of the dangers here are echo chambers. We're going to see more homogenous teams. We're going to see groupthink, and it really hinders innovation and creativity. And there are just so many missed perspectives. So this sort of lack of diverse voices it's gonna cause problems, and these services and products that companies are creating may not resonate with the broad audience that they hoped. I think, yeah, so in terms of the way it's shifted, I think that there are still options to promote diversity and inclusion where the legal landscape is different. I think you still have to focus on skills and potential. You still have to think about your recruitment processes, maybe implement blind recruitment processes. There has to be more training around diversity and inclusion. Some of the things like mentorship and sponsorship and setting clear goals, those are going to become even more important in environments where there's some limitations.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost a little bit of a regression may be seen in those initiatives for sure. Tasha, I'll pass it to you.
Sure. I definitely have seen the regression that you're talking about. I think it's really fear-based. And then some are just kind of like, let's pump the brakes just to make sure we're staying in the pocket without getting out of line with stakeholders, et cetera, who disagree with the work. And, that's concerning to me. And then on the other hand, I've certainly had some clients who've kind of doubled down and be like, great, how are we going to rebrand this? What are we going to call it? If DEI is triggering as a term, then again, we're doing human-centered work. You can't tell me that that's wrong. And we're going to continue to drive inclusion and belonging. How can that be bad? And so I've got some who are just doubling down. And so then that turns into team building facilitation about learning journeys through being inclusive. And then, how do you, to Carrie's point that she keeps reminding us, which I think it's worth repeating, is how is leadership continuing to hone the skills? And, how do you stay within the legal parameters, et cetera? I will give this analogy, though. I'm reminded of the Great Recession, 2008. And this is like, it felt like the sky was falling, housing crisis, home builders were just like, oh my gosh, we can't sell anymore, inventory's low, all the things, terrifying. And people are losing jobs left and right. And I remember being on a project where, the last thing we're going to do is turn off our marketing, okay? We're going to keep touting this mess. We're going to orbit this giant hairball of uncertainty. And we are going to keep being a beacon of hope of that, hey, here's an opportunity to get, to buy a home, to come, start a business, et cetera, while, less inventory, but we're still going to keep going, right? And so then what happened was, by us continuing to communicate in the market and just assure people that, hey, we're still here, you've got this, just come experience any part of this community. When things turned around, roughly 3 to 4 years later, 5 years later, everyone was coming to this community that once they were in the right position, everyone was coming like, I want to live there. That feels like a safe haven. That's where I want to be, And so similarly, I think for those who keep going at their inclusion and belonging practices, keep doing it in action, keep using language and creating human-centered belonging, they're going to stand out in the long run, 3-5 years from now. People are going to gravitate toward that kind of connection and get away from anything that's affiliated with division.
Absolutely. And I think you spoke to that really well. And DEI has been villainized in this last year. And people have, stepped back from using buzzwords that kind of are around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So like, do you dare continue that work with good intention and kind of risk the backlash of, oh, well, DEI is woke, and what is your organization really doing? You know, are you gonna face that head on and stick to your guns and feel really strong in the inclusive initiatives that you're putting forward? Or are you gonna kind of succumb to what, I like how you said, like the hairball of just the unexpected? I think that's a really great point. So as leaders, or as anybody who's, you know, influential in their organization or daily life even, just how are you going to navigate as an individual during a time when something that's really important is facing backlash? I think that's a great point. Randy, to you.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about this through the experience of academia. I'm also an assistant professor at Macalester College, which is a liberal arts college in St. Paul. And we had early on this year, we had a faculty meeting. They talked about a reversal of affirmative action. And I was very relieved and also encouraged to hear that that this is not going to change what we're looking for in terms of our student body. Because whatever you say about affirmative action, whether it was a forced thing to do, the college saw the value that that brought to the college. And we don't need to have a rule or a law in order to still have a practice that is diverse and inclusive and is equitable. So yeah, it just becomes what we're looking for. It becomes one of our requirements. It becomes a value that we seek in the students that we enroll.
Absolutely. And again, going to kind of the checkbox thing, like affirmative action was that checkbox. It's not necessarily there anymore. So again, being an influential person in education, how do you, this is just the new norm. This is what we have. Totally. That's great. I had no idea that you were a professor as well. That's super awesome. I love that. What classes do you teach?
Directing and acting mostly. I also do theater history, and yeah.
Awesome.
It was my first full-time year, tenure track
Oh,
year. So
that's awesome.
I learned a lot. Academia as a whole, other world.
Amazing, amazing, fabulous. Okay, last scheduled question we have here, and then we'll go into audience questions. In your opinion, how can organizations improve their hiring processes to ensure inclusive and efficient match? Randy, I'll start with you on this.
Yeah, so I talked again earlier about the idea of or theaters that want to diversify their programming, and so there's a theater, a very large theater in Oregon, the largest regional theater in the country, called Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and it's in Ashland, Oregon, right? And we were there for an Asian American festival and conference, and so there was a bunch of Asians that landed in Asheville, small, sweet town, very hippy dippy town. Lots of like restaurants and cute things, and we were hanging out, and The Wiz was also performing at the same time that we were there with our festival. So we took over downtown, and you'd see us eating and having in the coffee shops, in the gift shops. And every time we went out after our evenings of performances, we didn't see any of the cast of The Wiz hanging out in any of the bars or the restaurants that we were at. And so we ran into them during the day one time. They're like, "Where are you all? We are like, the Asians are taking over. Let's BIPOC this thing." And they were like, "No, we don't feel safe, or we don't feel like we feel welcomed out in the bars and in the restaurants. So we just hang out in each other's apartments after the show, and we just hang out with ourselves." And so that to me is an example of, yes, you're doing diverse work in terms of programming and bringing actors, employees to your town, but you have not educated the town and you have not set up a structure in which they can feel welcomed and safe. So it goes just beyond, again, the checkbox of, oh, we'll add color to this, we'll bring in this, without taking care of the whole culture around them to make sure that they feel welcomed and safe and that there's a place for them and that they don't have to hide away in their apartments, but can eat outside along with the place in which you hired them at.
Yeah, and having that strong framework, those strong like building bones around the diversity initiative, again, the program can be there, but it's the support behind it. I mean, we see that a lot when we're consulted, you know, oh, we want more diversity. Let's just throw, you know, person of color in a certain role, and we have to evaluate, are we comfortable putting a person of color in that role? Is that something where that person's going to feel safe, heard, acknowledged? Like, again, moving out of the check boxes, but is the framework there to support that person and have them thrive? That's a great point. I love that you brought that up. Thank you. Tasha, I will pass that question over to you.
Sure. I mean, I think just to echo something that Randy said earlier about, like, you know, that check-in where you can certainly like review and reassess your recruitment practice to see what you tweak, what changes need to be made. I think those surveys can certainly inform like how people are feeling welcome. But on that hiring side, I do find what's most concerning are hiring managers concerned or informed about like how you, like, to your point, like, how do you educate hiring managers, diverse talent, like, and being really thoughtful, like, is this a good place, good fit for this talent? Will they be welcomed? And so I think of, you know, the teams, while you're so excited to like expand your composition of talent, are you truly familiar and aware and open to learning what it's like to hold space and create a true, like an authentic culture of belonging for difference? And so to that end, what I believe, you know, is that lived experience quotient. Like those lived experience skills are so valuable beyond like traditional, like, where'd you go to college, what you studied, what was your GPA, what great firms did you work for, et cetera. And more so like, how did your lived experience, you know, inform skill that can be applicable to this role? And how do we weight that in terms of placing value on that and hiring? So I'll give a very easy low-hanging fruit example is a single mother. I can assure you that a single mother or a single father or a single parent knows how to budget. They're really good at like saying, and they can bear a lot of response. They are a leader of this family and keeping things. That's a skill set that I want to place value on as a lived experience skill. So I think lived experience quotient, making sure people are educated and learning about how to embrace diverse cultures, and then what are the check-ins throughout that hiring process.
Absolutely. And kind of that goes off of the human connection, like the budgeting. You never know what people have gone through. Maybe it's not in their textbook last position, but you don't know what they do in their daily life outside of the workforce and how important those key factors are as well. Yeah, great point. Carrie, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, the hiring processes are fortunately a place where we've got lots of ideas, and there are lots of things that we can implement. They all sound a lot more boring than what Tasha and Randy are talking about, but we really are. You know, we really do need to go back to rubrics. We have to deal with what we have, and what we have are, you know, the mandate to use clear and objective criteria, to use diverse interview panels, to do everything we can to eliminate bias during candidate evaluations. I think, you know, one of the most you know, impactful things that I've heard recently around diverse talent pools actually came from Michelle Campbell, who's the CEO of Diverse Talent, and she was talking about how she's been hearing for years, you know, that say for instance, engineers, people in tech, whatever, there is no diverse talent pool. And she said, stop saying that. It's not true. And so I think that, having that realization and kind of thinking creatively about, how do we implement these boring rubrics and metrics and rules and techniques to make sure that people are thinking about, how do we connect? How do we actually go and connect and infuse this whole process with something human that's meaningful and that might create a safe psychological space for somebody to come in and become part of our organization. I think, to kind of back up a little bit, really scary to think about the way that DEI is becoming villainized and these terms are sort of slapped around and they might lose meaning if we don't keep our eye on the ball and keep that sort of human factor front and center, because the fact is that it makes a difference. It makes a difference to the bottom line. And there are studies coming out every year by all the big guys that back that up. McKinsey just came out in 2023 with a brand new one, and I can't remember the exact number, but it's like close to 4% are more likely, if they're the 40% that they found that were diverse were more likely to financially outperform those that weren't. So we're still seeing the examples of why it's important. And just thinking about hiring, there are lots of things that we can do. We can do the diverse panels, we can do behavioral interviewing, so that we are looking at the full skill set, and partnering, right, with companies, with nonprofits and community organizations to think about, are we being as thoughtful, planful, and open as we can be. I think one of the things that's been cool that's added to this as well has been salary transparency. I think that's such a powerful change for those of us in HR and recruiting. Just that ability to publish salaries and promote pay equity. I mean, what a wonderful development.
Yeah, absolutely. And creating those structures where somebody can come into the role, but like we were talking about earlier, feel supported, and kind of to Tasha's point as well, once somebody's in that role, what continued education and development is the whole organization going through to make, culture development, make retention a priority? It's not, okay, great, this person or these few people are in these roles, we're set. It's a continuous practice. So I really you guys all had 3 wonderful points there. Thank you so much. All right, moving on, we do have an audience question going back to the 11th and first chair example. So how would you coach a staff member that is anxious about voicing their ideas? And what tips would you give to a team member that has ideas that they want to implement, but they're not quite sure how to come across because they don't want to come across as overshadowing or kind of overstepping their leader? What advice would you give? Whoever wants to take that one, I'm not going to pick on someone for that, so go for it. I think you're on mute, Randy.
How many times have I heard that? I think that there's we're still doing this. There is, people communicate in different ways. And I feel like sometimes a workplace, there's one way to communicate and you have to be out and you have to be fast. And not all cultures are comfortable that way. So I would just say have different ways for people to participate, that is not necessarily in a meeting, everyone's trying to be the one, and just allow different styles of communicating to exist and give space for that. So it might be like, if you want to do it through a more casual way of doing it, or through like a suggestion box, or through like other people just have, and then give space for that voice. That's another thing, and not just, oh, thank you, and then we move on from it.
Yeah, accessibility to input, giving people the different ways to go about it. I totally agree. And sometimes you can't even think of things in a meeting, even if you want to say something. So giving the options of, hey, I have this box open. Hey, you can anonymous survey, whatever it is. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. Accessibility there is super
I'd
important.
love to add to that if that's okay.
Yeah.
So let's say you're the person who has this idea, but you're hesitant to speak up. So very helpful if your organization has these different ways that you can communicate in a way that feels comfortable for you. But here are two ideas I have to help work that discomfort when you're in a setting that seems to be traditional. So one is, I believe in mentorship. So find a trusted mentor or sponsor who you could bounce your idea off. And when I say trusted, I mean that they won't take your idea and run. So someone that you could bounce your idea off, and if they can give you advice on how you could best present that within the organization, right? And there's this book called Inclusify. I'm like a big reader of it by Stephanie K. Johnson. And she talked about this idea of like amplification networks, where can you ask this person, this mentor, to, okay, so when I present this, will you have my back? You co-sign that while I'm in this meeting? Will you say what you like about this idea to reinforce? Second, I promise you that an organization wants to hear your outstanding ideas, big or small. They're all outstanding because you're contributing to the business. You're generating vested interest and doing, putting forth an idea that can help the organization. And so one of the things that I used to do, and sometimes I still do this to this day, if I'm trying to conjure up my courage to be like E.F. Hutton, I just aged myself. But like there's this old commercial, when Hutton speaks, everybody listens. If you want your E.F. Hutton moment, like I used to always write like my key points. I put like 3 or 4 bullets in the upper right corner of Notepad, and I organized how I wanted to say, just not full sentences, just like key ideas. And then, you feel like the pressure, it's all building, and you're like, oh my God, my heart's pounding really hard at the end. But what helped like calm that was I would say my point, but I knew like what my 3 to 5 bullets were. And I was poised, everyone heard, and then helpful if somebody was amplifying my idea in the room, but I demonstrated that I'm willing to speak up in those meeting settings if that's one of the 5 ways that you could communicate. Mentor, and then just build up the courage to write down those bullets, and over time, you'll just get better and better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of piggybacking off of the human connection portion, it's important to have support, and that's big in retention as well. So having mentor, having a colleague that you're like, we're on the same page here, back me up. The reinforcement of that support really goes and instills confidence in people to speak up further. Great points. I'm going to do the 3 bullet points now. I love that idea. Great idea.
That is a great
Carrie,
idea.
we'll end it with you.
Oh, well, I think, as leaders, we have we have a responsibility to make sure that those feedback channels are, and that there's a diversity of those, so that folks have options in terms of how they're going to tap into providing feedback, asking questions, and sharing their experience. So I echo what both Randy and Tasha had about that. Super helpful.
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for all of your input. I love that we all come from different areas. Randy, I feel like I've learned so much about you, and it was such a cool industry to tap into. So I really appreciate all of you taking the time. Our speaker profiles are available on the WOVA app. If we didn't get any of those questions answered, be sure to message into them and they can send you a message back, any resources that they have as well. And then the recording will be available if you missed parts or missed all of it. But thank you to my panelists. Thank you to all the panelists for Equity in HR today. It was truly amazing. A hit once again. And thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your evening.